Sheikh Imran Hosein, you are known throughout the world. You have a large following, particularly from what you said at the time of 9/11, but also about geostrategic events. I'm honored to have you here today, and I'd like you to guide us as to what developments are unfolding in the world, and therefore how we might prepare ourselves. We seem to be moving towards a war, towards conflict everywhere. Would you like me to be more specific in my question?
No, I think we are on the same wavelength. We both recognize, Morris, that the world is on the brink of great wars. To be more specific, great Zionist wars. And what we have witnessed these last 10 years was preparatory to the great wars which are soon to unfold. From our Islamic eschatological perspective, we recognize that these wars are being waged for a particular purpose, and that is to effect a transition, a dramatic transition from the United States of America as a ruling state in the world to a successor ruling state, which, believe it or not, Israel wants to become. And so these wars are being waged on Israel's behalf. There is a macro analysis that we can discuss, and then there is the micro, in which the events in Syria take pride of place at the moment, and the impending war on Iran comes next, and the two seem to be linked together. This is my view of the reality of the world today in respect of war and peace.
Well, it sounds very accurate. I should think it strikes home with everyone. I mean, Israel seems to control the world already, apart from a couple of pockets like Syria and Iran and North Korea, perhaps. I mean, it's already in control of all the banking and financial institutions.
Israel is in control of governments, but not of people. My view, Morris, is that a very large proportion of people living in Europe and in North America are soon going to have their eyes open and are going to develop very negative thinking concerning Israel. And that poses a threat to Israel. Modern Western man is not entirely brainwashed. No. Television has done a lot to brainwash him. But modern Western man in modern Western civilization in Europe, in North America, in Australia, is still a thinking person. And public opinion has displayed itself several times in the past in opposition to Zionist agenda. For example, on the eve of war against Iraq, I think Britain experienced its largest public demonstration in British history.
Yes.
that is an indication that you cannot succeed in entirely brainwashing the Western people. And when war on Iran takes place and the consequent collapse of the US dollar, the US economy, and paper money around the world reduces most of mankind, the masses, to poverty, and the rich lose a substantial proportion of their wealth, I think the awakening in Western civilization of the sinister role that Israel is playing and the Zionists are playing is going to manifest itself in public opinion. So Israel does not really rule the minds of mankind as yet. Israel rules governments. And in the Muslim world, the situation is even clearer. That while the Pakistani government, for the last many years, has functioned as a shoeshine boy of Washington, fulfilling Washington's wishes, the Pakistani people has detested and despised the role of the United States in world affairs. This is somewhat similar to the rest of the Muslim world, opinion in the Muslim world, and most certainly in the Arab world. The masses think differently from the governments which have been bought hook, line, and sinker. Even in Saudi Arabia, I think there's considerable sentiment in Saudi Arabia which is in opposition to the Saudi government's policies.
Going back to what you were saying a minute ago regarding Iran, I'm just struck by the bravery Iran seems to be showing in confronting the United States, in preparing to close the Hormuz Gulf, and it seems to be becoming a leader for all of us that have no voice or power. It's as if Iran is the only country ready to battle with America, with the imperialism, the Zionist agenda.
The psychology of religion explains to us something of the Iranian religious profile. The Shia have a different psychology of religion to the Sunni Muslim. They consider themselves to be an embattled people, a people who have undergone great sacrifice, and they have the spirit of martyrdom in them, because the Shia faith has a large part of its origins located in the martyrdom of the grandson of the Prophet, Allah's blessings be upon him. So these are not a people to be trifled with. And if you wage war on them, you would find that they would fight with a kind of passion that Western man is incapable of.
Well, so it's all for a good reason, and there's an explanation. I wonder, Israel is very clever at staying out of conflict and perhaps encouraging it amongst everyone else. But how is it going to stay out of a war if there is going to be conflict with Iran or Syria? Can you imagine that Israel could?
I think that Israel wants to start the war with a lightning strike against France as well. And once Israel starts the war, then the war has to itself produce more wars that would be triggered off by a guiding hand from behind, like the events of 1914, with the assassination of the Grand Duke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo. And it triggered off a series of events which led to the Great War, the First World War.
Yes.
Similarly, I believe that the attack on Iran is meant to respond to far more than simply the recognition of a nuclear threat from Iran. Oh no, that's not all. If Israel is to replace the United States of America as the next ruling state in the world, then something has to be done to bring down the United States, to cut it down to size. We know what happened at the time of the transfer of power from Britain to the United States. Our Islamic eschatological analysis recognizes three ruling states in modern civilization. The first being Britain and its Pax Britannica, and then the United States with its Pax Americana, and then finally Israel with a Pax Judaica. And at the end of that, our Prophet, Allah's blessings be upon him, and only a prophet could speak like this, not a normal human being, that a man will arise in Jerusalem. And he described that man to us 1400 years ago. Out there in the desert of Arabia, Morris, a man who never went to school, didn't have a university degree, could not read and could not write, didn't have a single book in his home. And if you showed him his name, he could not recognize his own name. That man described for us an event which is probably about 20 or 25 years away from now, of a man who would arise in Israel, in Jerusalem, ruling the world from Jerusalem. And he would be a Jew. He would be a young man. He'd be powerfully built. He'd have curly hair. This is an exact description of the individual. Nothing symbolic here. This is all literal.
Yes.
And that man would declare from Jerusalem that he is the Messiah. The term Messiah is something with which modern Western civilization is quite familiar. It is there in Christianity. The Son of Mary is the true Messiah. Every Christian is supposed to believe that. And every Muslim is supposed to believe that. And they do. There are only two people in the world who recognize Jesus, the Son of Mary, as the true Messiah. That's the Christian and the Muslim. So he would declare that he is the Messiah. And we know from our scripture that the Messiah is going to rule the world with a rule which would be just, and that history would end with the advent of the Messiah, and hence the triumph of truth over all rivals. The problem is that this man who would arise in Jerusalem and who would claim to be the Messiah would not be the Son of Mary. No. He would be somebody or someone created by God Almighty and programmed to impersonate the Messiah. The Christians know him as the Antichrist. The Muslims know him as Al-Masih ad-Dajjal, the false Messiah who has a PhD in deception. And so Israel wants to rule the world so that this man can rule the world from Jerusalem. That's why we have had the movement from Pax Britannica, and the British sterling pound is a universal currency, to Pax Americana and the US dollar taking over from the British pound. And now we are on the verge of the fall of the United States, the decline and fall of the United States of America, so that Israel can replace it. And that decline and fall, of course, is clearly visible to us in the fate which now awaits the US dollar and the US economy, consequently the US economy, but not so clearly apparent in the fate which now awaits the US military. Since 9/11, the United States has been led by its nose by the Zionists to enter into one war after another, to the extent that the Zionists have now taken the United States to a stage where it is militarily up to its throat in wars. And to start new wars, particularly with Iran, could eventually lead the United States to a situation where it will face military defeat. And I think this is what the Zionists want. So that you have the monetary collapse, the economic collapse, the unpopularity of the United States all over the world, and now the impending military defeat. And only Israel will be able to intervene to save the United States. That's what Israel wants. And when Israel intervenes to save the United States from military defeat, the writing is on the wall. The United States is no longer the ruling state in the world. The curtain is coming down on Pax Americana. And so the attack on Iran, I believe, is meant to provoke a series of wars which will eventually trap the United States and bring about its decline as a ruling state in the world.
You referred to Israel's control over governments around the world, which I think we will all accept. But this messianic drive which you've referred to, it seems it's causing destruction in the wars, but there's also theories, people talking about HAARP, earthquakes, forest fires. There's a general motivation for destruction. I guess this is to bring about the false Messiah, as you put it.
We will have to, if it is possible, conduct sufficient research to be able to provide evidence that some of these so-called natural disasters are not so natural at all. But sometimes a very convenient earthquake takes place, like the one which I anticipate would reach the masjid in Jerusalem. It's called Masjid al-Aqsa, where the Temple of Solomon used to be located. When that convenient earthquake brings down that building, Israel can then move to reconstruct their temple. And he cannot claim to be the Messiah, the false Messiah, the Antichrist, until he has rebuilt the temple. So I think we need to be able to provide evidence, if it is possible to do so, to demonstrate that all of these so-called natural disasters are natural at all.
No, I'm so pleased you asked for that. You know, it's giving religion a bad name if we're going through so much destruction, and it's religious people in Zionism that are creating all this trouble and pain. And we've seen millions of people die over the last 10 years. And some people say, well, it's just religion. It's because of religion that these wars are happening. What would be your response?
As a Muslim, I have tremendous respect for Judaism. And as a Muslim, I will not tolerate anyone vilifying the Jewish faith, disrespecting the Jewish faith. I cannot allow that, because I have tremendous respect for Judaism. I have great respect for Christianity. The Zionists, however, don't seem to share that respect for Judaism. Not at all. The Zionists appear to be people who have simply put on the clothing of Judaism, whereas in effect they are an essentially godless people. They have no faith, they have no morals, they have no belief in judgment, that they will have to answer one day for 9/11. They tell monstrous lies, Morris, monstrous lies. And yet, they don't care about it. They would kill innocent children, women. They would urinate on the dead body of an opponent. They would take the Quran and flush it down a toilet. And it doesn't bother them. They can still go home and have dinner and watch TV. As though the heart of a human being has been replaced with the heart of a beast. And so it is not really Judaism, the religion, which is being tarnished by their conduct. And we in the world of Islam make a distinction between those Jews who are oppressors and those who are not. Those Jews who act in a manner contrary to Jewish religious beliefs, and those Jews who remain faithful to the morals and ethics of Judaism. And we remain forever prepared to enter into friendship and into alliance with Christians and with Jews who share with us this abhorrence of Israel's manifest oppressive behavior.
I think we are living in a Jewish century, and I would include consumerism and usury and the general lives we are all living. So it takes a stretch of the imagination to really imagine Judaism outside of usury and consumerism as the materialist world that we live in. But I guess there's a pure state where that exists. Perhaps
there are Jews in the world who despise Israel.
There are, but they're still perhaps happy to run the financial institutions of all the countries in the world.
I think there are Jews in the world who recognize the financial and monetary oppression that the banking system has now inflicted upon mankind. And I, for one, would not want to stereotype all Jews and to put this blame at this footstep of Judaism, the religion, but certainly Zionism. And as I realized recently from one of the prophecies of our Prophet, who said that we are going to make an alliance with something called Rome. The word Rome is in the Quran. And Rome in the Quran refers to Christians, but not Western Christians. It refers to Eastern Christians who have not been, who have not become so much a part of modern Western civilization as Western Europe. It will be Russia, the Orthodox Christian Church of Russia and of Eastern Europe. And he said that we are going to make an alliance with them. I see, Morris, I see the beginnings of that alliance already in Iran's relationship with Russia. I see the beginnings of that alliance in the fact that Pakistan is now moving away from its alliance with the United States, and Pakistan is reaching out to Russia. I see the possibility that when NATO begins their big wars soon, that public opinion in Turkey is going to turn against the government, which at the moment is supporting NATO's membership, and that the Turkish people are going to wage civil war to take Turkey out of NATO. And in that civil war, the alliance with Russia is most likely going to manifest itself. And I think this will interest you, Morris, because I notice that you have been paying a lot of attention to Syria. I don't think that the present Syrian government has moral credentials and religious credentials with which to be able to survive the sustained attack which has been launched at it by the Zionists. What the Syrian government has done over the last 40, 50 years has now resulted in what is called the chickens coming home to roost. Hafiz al-Assad, for example, Bashar's father, was barbaric in his oppression of the majority Sunni population of Syria. The French are the ones who supported this minority Alawite group to take over Syria and rule Syria. And they've done so. And while they do have some support because of their opposition to Israel and to Zionism, they do have some support in Syria. The fact is that chickens are coming home to roost now because a minority regime has sustained its oppression over a majority religious community, the Sunni. And so my own personal opinion is that on its own, the Syrian regime cannot survive, and that neither Russia nor China would be able to intervene to save the Syrian regime. However, there is the possibility, if it can be articulated in Syria to the Syrian majority Sunni community, that the Prophet spoke of an alliance with Rome. And so you should distance yourself from the Zionists. And in your effort to liberate yourself from oppression and to bring back freedom to your country, you should align yourself with Russia. And if Russia understands the role that Russia can play, Russia can succeed in easing a transition in Syria, a bloodless transition, which would bring the majority community to rule over the country and yet maintain an alliance with Iran and yet maintain an alliance with Russia, and so outmaneuver the Zionist plans over Syria. I don't see any other route open. If you do not take an initiative, it's only a matter of time before attrition results in the collapse of the Syrian regime.
No, I think my understanding is the ruling regime would probably agree with you wholeheartedly. They see themselves also as a bastion of Arab resistance and resistance against Zionism and pan-Arabism, but they would, I think they will give way, as you have said, under the cloak of elections perhaps, but their main resistance is against Israel. I think they're prepared to see the light as you have described it. I'm surprised to say. Excuse me?
There's a second reason why the Syrian regime cannot survive. It's not only because it's a religious minority, a sectarian minority, which has long oppressed the majority Sunni. But in addition to that, it is an essentially secular regime, secular and Arab nationalist. And neither secularism nor Arab nationalism can stand up at this particular moment in time to this Arab Spring, which has been very cleverly planned to arouse the religious sentiments of the people and to bring about an Islamic awakening and Islamic governments, so-called Islamic governments, all over the Arab world. And because Bashar al-Assad and his regime are secular and Arab nationalists, that also militates against their survival.
Well, you've brought us on to the Arab Spring and the political parties which are Islamic and the Islamic movements. There's the terrible state of Tripoli, run by Belhaj, if I may say it is terrible. I mean, all these atrocities committed by people championing Islam. What has gone wrong? What is your interpretation? How has this happened?
I think we have to make a distinction between Arab uprisings, spontaneous, so-called spontaneous Arab uprisings in Tunisia, in Egypt, etc., and a pre-planned and an armed insurrection in Libya and now in Syria. This was planned long in advance. And there are many reasons why they wanted to bring down the Libyan government. One of which was, of course, Libya's opposition to Zionism and Libya's championing of the Palestinian cause. The other reason was, of course, and now we're learning about it more and more, of Libya's plan to introduce a new currency, gold coins and silver coins, the dinar and dirham. But there's a third reason, and that is that in order for Israel to rule the world, and for that man to stand up in Jerusalem and to declare that he is the Messiah, the state of Israel must expand its territory, because someone wrote into the Bible a falsehood, and that is that the Holy Land extends from the river of Egypt to the river Euphrates. That's not true, but that's there in the Bible. I think he did that because the Jews lived in Egypt for a few hundred years, and they lived in that part of Egypt that is known as the Eastern Delta, which is from the River Nile to the Red Sea. And so they decided that that is a part of the Holy Land. And the Jews lived in Babylon for a few hundred years. And so they decided that that also is a part of the Holy Land. And so in order for Israel to claim that it is holy Israel of David and of Solomon, the territory of the state of Israel will have to expand to encompass the biblical frontiers. And therefore Israel has to take physical control of the Eastern Delta. And that requires an Israeli ground invasion of Egypt to take the Eastern Delta from the Nile to the Red Sea. I believe that part of the explanation for the attack on Libya lies in the fact that they wanted NATO to be in Libya, so that when the attack on Egypt takes place, Israel will launch a ground invasion from the east, and NATO will attack from the west. And I believe part of the strategy for the division of Sudan into two states, and a southern Sudan which is increasingly linked with Israel, is to allow for a further front from the south, so that you deal with Sudan and Egypt at the same time. And in the process you're able to take control of that part of Egypt which, according to Israel, is Israeli territory.
Yes.
This is my explanation for the long-planned insurrection in Libya.
Dreadful. And they've done the same with Syria, and they would like to have had a no-fly zone. They would have liked to have covered it in depleted uranium and toxic waste, as they've done elsewhere. But Russia has stopped that, Russia and China. I mean, that is why I appear to defend the regime in Damascus, is out of fear of what the West would like to do. But, sir, perhaps I can bring you to the recent news that Iran is now going to sell its oil for gold to India. That is confirmed, and China may follow suit. Is this the end of the dollar now?
Oh, the dollar is already at its end. It's being kept alive artificially, Morris. And it is because the US administration knows that an attack on Iran is going to bring down the dollar. And that's why they don't want an attack on Iran. They are also conscious of the fact that an attack on Iran is likely to lead to world war. And the United States much prefers to fight countries like Libya than a country like Russia. So I do believe that we are seeing a positive development here, that India and Russia and China and Turkey have already declared their intention to disregard and defy the sanctions on Iran imposed by the Americans and by Europe. But what we would like to do, Morris, is to try to bring about an alliance of like-minded people who are opposed to Zionism and to the Zionist quest for world political and economic dominion. If all of us who are like-minded can come together, and that the world of Islam, which stands at the forefront in resisting Zionism today, were to take the lead, not the governments, of course, because the governments, most of them are in the pockets of the Zionists, but the people, that we can come together. A good place to come together would be Venezuela. Mr. Chavez would be pleased to welcome us in Venezuela and get to know each other and begin networking and try to come up with a common policy and a common front. One of which would be to restore real money, which is gold and silver coins, for trade, and to eliminate the use of the Zionist money. I call it the Zionist money, which has come out of Bretton Woods and the IMF, the paper currencies. Yeah.
Yes. Well, that's a very good note to kind of end on. It's a solution. I was going to ask you what we can all do, but in a way you've there encompassed a vision, and you've put Chavez at the top of it, which is a new idea. I've not heard of this before, but it makes sense, where a resistance can be claimed. It's a shame that Zionism has now adopted such a bad reputation and that it's been doing so much evil. It didn't have to go that way, but it has. I guess these people have evolved from Eastern European Jews. Am I incorrect, or am I able to ask you that question?
I don't think the European is a bona fide Jew, because a Jew is Semitic. Genetically, he's Semitic.
Yes.
And the Europeans are not a Semitic people.
That's really, yes.
And so I make a distinction between the European Jew and the Semitic Jew. But whoever chooses to claim to be a Jew ought to be recognized as a Jew. And so we recognize them as Jews. But Zionism was born out of an obsession of restoring the Jews in their Jewish homeland that God gave to them, and in restoring a state of Israel that David and Solomon had established. And although Zionism has never proclaimed it, in also causing that state of Israel to one day rule the world. Zionism from day one has employed deception. They began by saying all that we want to do is to provide a home for our people. But that was not true. What they wanted to do was to ultimately establish or re-establish Holy Israel and cause that Holy Israel to rule the world. And that will bring an end to history that would validate the Jewish claim to truth. They never said that, but now we know that. Zionism has employed every devious means and every wicked means to achieve that goal, with monetary oppression, economic oppression, cultural oppression, agricultural oppression. And so there is no defense whatsoever, none at all, for Zionism. And we in the world who recognize that must now come together and form a common bond in opposition to Zionism. The world of Islam stands ready, the people, not the governments, the people, recognize that we have to build links with all those in the world who will join with us in a common bond to confront the Zionist oppression.
I want to thank you very much. It's a cult of an occultish thought that is ruling us, it seems. I want to thank you so much for your time, and I would very much hope that we can do this again.
You're most welcome, Morris.
Yeah, I mean, if there's anything that you should add, please do. I think it's been a wealth of knowledge.
I think perhaps the most urgent thing that we have mentioned today was a strategy that would resolve the problem in Syria. And that is that the majority Sunni Muslim community must be reminded that Prophet Muhammad, Allah's blessings be upon him, prophesied that you will make an alliance with Rome, which is Russia and Eastern Europe, not the Western part, not the Zionist alliance, not NATO. And so the strategy for Syria that the Syrian majority Muslim community, the Sunni Muslim community, must be reminded of what our Prophet said, and that is that we Muslims will make an alliance with Rome. And Rome today is most certainly not NATO. Rather, Rome today is Russia and Eastern Europe. The Eastern Christians, not the Western. And therefore the Sunni majority in Syria, in their legitimate struggle for liberation from the oppression of a regime which has consistently oppressed them for the last 40, 50 years, brutally oppressed them. Hafiz al-Assad, the father of Bashar, was notorious for his brutal oppression of the Sunni majority. And so they do have a legitimate struggle for liberation from oppression, but that struggle can achieve its objective in a peaceful way through Russian intervention. Once they reach out to Russia, then Russia would know that they have both sides on their side, the majority Sunni and the minority regime. And so Russia can act in a manner to mediate the struggle peacefully and bring about, if necessary, a regime change in Syria, which will ensure that Syria does not enter into the Zionist camp, as Libya has done. I think that's the important thing. That's the most important thing to come out of this interview.
Well, thank you. They are having elections. We will see. They are having elections in February or March. I don't know. But your message will get across, and many will listen and take it on board. And I wish to thank you for that.
Thank you, Morris. Yes.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you
again. Allah fahab li taubata waghfir dhunubi fa innaka ghafiru dhanbil azim. Ilahi lasdu lil firdausi ahla wala Allah fahab li taubata waghfir dhunubi fa innaka ghafiru dhanbil azim. Tuhanku, aku tidak layak untuk syurgamu, tetapi aku tidak pula sanggup menanggung siksa nerakamu. Dari itu kurniakanlah ampunan kepadaku, ampunkanlah dosaku. Sesungguhnya Engkaulah pengampun dosa-dosa besar. Tuhanku, aku tidak layak untuk syurgamu, tetapi aku tidak pula sanggup menanggung siksa nerakamu. Dari itu kurniakanlah ampunan kepadaku, ampunkanlah dosaku. Sesungguhnya Engkaulah pengampun dosa-dosa besar. Ilahi lastu lil firdausi a'la wala aqwa ala naril jahim. Allah fahab li taubatan waghfir dhunubi fa innaka
in Western civilization of the sinister role that Israel is playing and that the Zionists are playing is going to manifest itself in public opinion. So Israel does not really rule the minds of mankind as yet. Israel rules governments. And in the Muslim world, the situation is even clearer. That while the Pakistani government, for the last many years, has functioned as a shoeshine boy of Washington, fulfilling Washington's wishes, the Pakistani people has detested and despised the role of the United States in world affairs. This is somewhat similar to the rest of the Muslim world, opinion in the Muslim world, and most certainly in the Arab world. The masses think differently from the governments which have been bought hook, line, and sinker. Even in Saudi Arabia, I think there's considerable sentiment in Saudi Arabia which is in opposition to the Saudi government's policies. Two seem to be linked together. This is my view of the reality of the world today in respect of war and peace.
Well, it sounds very accurate. I should think it strikes home with everyone. I mean, Israel seems to control the world already, apart from a couple of pockets like Syria and Iran and North Korea, perhaps. I mean, it's already in control of all the banking and financial institutions.
Israel is in control of governments, but not of people. My view, Morris, is that a very large proportion of people living in Europe and in North America are soon going to have their eyes open and are going to develop very negative thinking concerning Israel. And that poses a threat to Israel. Modern Western man is not entirely brainwashed. No. Television has done a lot to brainwash him. But modern Western man in modern Western civilization in Europe, in North America, in Australia, is still a thinking person. And public opinion has displayed itself several times in the past in opposition to Zionist agenda. For example, on the eve of war against Iraq, I think Britain experienced its largest public demonstration in British history.
Yes.
That is an indication that you cannot succeed in entirely brainwashing the Western people. And when war on Iran takes place and the consequent collapse of the US dollar, the US economy, and paper money around the world reduces most of mankind, the masses, to poverty, and the rich lose a substantial proportion of their wealth, I think to be more specific, great Zionist wars. And what we have witnessed these last 10 years was preparatory to the great wars which are soon to unfold. From our Islamic eschatological perspective, we recognize that these wars are being waged for a particular purpose, and that is to effect a transition, a dramatic transition from the United States of America as a ruling state in the world to a successor ruling state, which, believe it or not, Israel wants to become. And so these wars are being waged on Israel's behalf. There is a macro analysis that we can discuss, and then there is the micro, in which the events in Syria take pride of place at the moment, and the impending war on Iran comes next. And the
Sheikh Imran Hosein, you are known throughout the world. You have a large following, particularly from what you said at the time of 9/11, but also about geostrategic events. I'm honored to have you here today, and I'd like you to guide us as to what developments are unfolding in the world, and therefore how we might prepare ourselves. We seem to be moving towards a war, towards conflict everywhere. Would you like me to be more specific in my question?
No, I think we are on the same wavelength. We both recognize, Morris, that the world is on the brink of great wars.